New Orleans injury attorney Brent Cueria. So you've been hurt offshore and you've called me to try to find out what kind of advice I should give you if you've been hurt offshore. Well, the first thing I would tell you to do is make sure that you filled out an incident report. A lot of people call me. The companies often try to get people to go back to work and try to shrug off the injury, and which is good. If you're able to go back to work, you should. But I think no matter how small the injury, fill out an incident report, because if things later end up getting worse or you need medical treatment, if you don't have an incident report, it's going to be more difficult to get the employer to pay for your medical treatment, and it'll be more difficult for your attorney to handle a case, because if you have an incident report, it's going to have the witnesses, it's going to have a company supervisor that's going to sign off on it. It'll have any of the basic facts of the accident. So, and it's going to lend more credence to your claim later on when you have to prove it in court. So that would be my first advice to you. And then if you were calling me and wanting to know what to do about your injuries, I would tell you that you're entitled to seek your own physician. If you're hurt offshore working on a crew boat or a jack-up barge or platform, whatever it is, the company's probably going to set you up with their own doctor. So if you have a typical back or neck injury, for example, you can have all kinds of injuries, but let's just use that example. They're going to set you up with an orthopedic doctor. Let's say you live in Patterson or Franklin or Amelia, something like that. They'll probably set you up with one of the typical orthopedic doctors that work for companies in Homa, and uh, they'll treat you, and they are paid for by the company, so you can understand who their allegiance is going to be to, which is the reason that you have the right to choose your own physician. So what I would do if I were representing you is I would tell you to treat with the doctor that companies provided, but we would also recommend doctors who we think are not afraid to go to court and give opinions, to not afraid to be in front of a jury and to treat you. And then typically what we see when somebody has injuries to their back or neck, the typical progression of treatment is somebody would treat for initial treatment. They do x-rays and they do examinations, and the company doctor will examine you uh, for a period of time. And then if we get you to your own choice of doctor, which you're entitled to, they'll do therapy, give you medicines. And then down the road, if you have problems after a couple of months or so, a lot of doctors will order an MRI to rule out any more longer term pathology, which is kind of the gold standard for any type of injury case, whether you're injured offshore on a crew boat, any kind of Jones Act claim, or even a car accident or any type of injury. That's today in medicine, that's what most doctors use to that. MRIs detect soft tissue injury inside your body, whereas like CT scans, X-rays are used to detect more less soft tissue injuries, more bony injuries. That's why when somebody goes to the emergency room and they get a CT of their brain, if they have a head injury, for example, they're looking for bony type injuries as opposed to an MRI, which is going to be for soft tissue injuries. So anyway, you would treat with those doctors if you're having injuries. And let's say I was bringing a Jones Act claim for you, which means we'd be suing your employer if you met the test for a Jones Act seaman. If I thought that you had permanent injuries and were not able to work, then we would file a suit, your Jones Act case for you. It would either be in state court or a federal court, depending upon what we thought was best for you. And then you would treat with the doctor, and then we would be dealing with the company for you to make sure that your maintenance and cure was paid. Your maintenance and cure means your maintenance would be your living expenses. Living expenses to live while you can't work. And there's certain ways they calculate that. And then the cure would be your medical expenses. They have to pay if you're injured on the job, like workers' comp is on land, maintenance and cure is on the water. If you're a seaman, and maintenance and cure, they would pay your medical bills up until you reach the point of maximum medical improvement. That's a different topic from MMI, but essentially MMI means when you can get no better without just receiving palliative treatment. But anyway, initially somebody is not going to be at MMI, most likely. That person he or she would continue to treat with a doctor, and if they're having with their own doctor, if they're having injuries, I would be filing a Jones Act suit or a general maritime suit for you against your employer and other people that may be responsible. There could be other non-employer defendants that would be brought into the case. And then we would file it for you. While that's going on, you would treat, and then we would be dealing with the different defendants and their attorneys, and we would be sending them what's called discovery, which means we want to find out how the accident happened and who the witnesses were and who was responsible for the various activities that were going on while you were hurt. That's why it's so important that you would have an incident report and you fill it out. And if you had called me early on and want to know what to do, and because I've had clients call me initially after they were hurt rather than 2 or 3 months later, and I would give them advice, what I just said earlier, fill out an incident report so you can get all the names of the witnesses. And also I would tell you to take pictures of any of the work area or anything involved with your injury so we could have that later to be able to prove our case to the judge or jury. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. They're very important. If you have, for example, a part of the vessel that was defective, a winch that broke or something, take a picture of it. If you were on some steps and fell because there was no non-skid or because steps were uneven and you got hurt, just examples of things that happen. You guys who work offshore know that offshore is very dangerous work. So take pictures so we could have all that and prove your case later on. So anyway, we would file the suit, do discovery. At some point, they would call me, and then want to set up your deposition. All that is they want to find out how bad you're hurt, who your doctors are, how you got hurt, how it's affected your life, and a lot of other questions on that line. And then at the same time, if they called to ask for your deposition, we would say, okay, we wanted to depose the captain of the vessel, the foreman, whoever was involved in the project that you were in. If you were operating on a crew boat, if you were working on a crew boat, we wanted to depose the captain and other crew members. If you're on a jackup rig, whoever was operating the jackup, if you're on a platform, whoever the company men were, and other people involved. So all you're doing is we're asking questions to prove our case. And the court reporter's there, and they have a little machine, and they take it all under oath, or sometimes they actually don't use a machine. They talk into a device, but it's all recorded under oath, and the lawyers get to read that later. Kind of like if we had this here, if it was being transcribed, we get to read it later and be able to find out what happened. And so then we would, as you continue to treat, if you want to know how I would prove your case, if you were somebody that you made 80, 100,000 a year working offshore, good money, and you thought you were going to have a hard time doing that again, then we would most likely have you be evaluated by a vocational evaluator, possibly a life care planner, somebody whose whole job and his whole career is to determine what other types of jobs somebody can do if they can't do the job that they were currently doing. So if you're working offshore and you used your body, used your back, as you guys know, it's hard work offshore. You're going to have a hard time earning 100,000 on land. So if a vocational evaluator might find out that you can only make $20,000-$30,000 a year or whatnot on land with your skill set. And then what I would do with that, if you made 100,000 before, whatever you made, 50, whatever, just picking numbers, I would take the difference between what you made offshore and what you make on land, and whatever the difference is. Let's say it's 50,000 a year. If you're a young guy, 30 years old, well, if you were going to have a work life expectancy for several decades, for example, then you can see that number adds up. It adds up to a lot. And I would get an economist to calculate that out so that the jury would know that 30 years of missing that 50,000 a year or whatever the difference that you can't make adds up to a good bit of money. And I would be able to present that to a jury. So essentially, this is what I would be telling you on your initial visit if you call me. And I would tell you that you only want to bring this claim if you're seriously hurt, because working offshore is a valuable job. You can earn a good bit of money. But if you were seriously hurt and needed a firm to handle that claim, we have a lot of experience. We've done this for many years, and we push them vigorously and zealously for our clients, and do the things that we told you that we just did. And then eventually we would get a trial date from the judge. I would be filing a motion to set the case for trial relatively early in the case, just to give us it's like a football game. You want a schedule of things to be done. And so you do that because the judge will give us a trial date down the road. But in between the trial date and when I set up a trial, there's things we would do, like get experts like we talked about, and get the economist, get the vocational expert. Maybe I would even need to get a liability expert, somebody that had worked offshore for their whole career and knew all the things that the companies and crew boat operators and various oil field operators were supposed to do. And they would be able to tell the judge or the jury what things they were negligent and failed to do, which caused your injury. So there's people that have jobs like that, and ex boat operators and ex safety directors for oil field companies and whatnot. They often go into that career and they will have uh, attorneys for the plaintiffs, which you would be as the injured person, would reach out to certain experts, and then they have the companies will have their own experts, and they all give their opinions, and everybody gives opinions in these cases, and we would just have to prove our case by 50.1%. It's not a criminal case. We have the burden of proving it more likely than not. So that's why, getting back to the beginning, the incident report is so important. So anyway, that's the advice I would be giving you. I would say that we'll work with you to document your injuries, to prove your case, to help you along the way, to give you good counsel and advice. And we wished you didn't have this type of injury, but if you did, uh, that's the advice we give you. Take care. Have a good